The next topic in the Biological Concepts module in this PowerPoint is Levels of Biological Organization. So the learning objective you need to focus on for this part of the PowerPoint is to identify the order of the levels of biological organization. This slide shows you all of the levels of organization, beginning at the smallest scale, which is the atom, all the way to the biosphere. The biosphere includes land, water, and lower atmosphere for the planet. So the levels of biological organization examines all aspects of life. Now, if you remember from the characteristics of life, all organisms have a highly ordered organization. And what that means, as I explained before, is that you could go from atoms to molecule to cell and so forth. So this is what I mean when I talk about a highly ordered organization. Now let's start at the smallest scale of biological organization. This is the atom. Now you're all probably familiar with the atom from chemistry that you've taken previously. So an atom is composed of subatomic particles. Now there are many different types of subatomic particles, and we're doing research on this all the time. But the three subatomic particles that you need to know for this course are protons, neutrons, and electrons. And we will cover those in our next module, which is the chemistry of life. Now the atom is the smallest unit of matter. Now take a second and try to recall what the definition of matter is. So matter is any object or material that takes up space. Right? So matter does not have to be living. Matter can be like the desk you're working on or the rock outside, but it does also refer to living organisms. But any type of matter is made up of atoms. Now, an atom is actually an element. So you can have a carbon atom, an oxygen atom, and so forth. And these are what make up all of the different types of matter. So our next unit of biological organization is a little broader in scope, meaning that it includes different types of atoms. So atoms can join together with chemical bonds. And when this happens, they form a molecule. Now what I'm showing you here on the right hand side of this picture is DNA. Now as you learned before, DNA is the molecule that includes your genes or the information for your genes. DNA is made up of different atoms such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. So it's a bunch of different molecules that form chemical bonds and come together to make a molecule. Now, a molecule, I'll put the definition down here for you. The technical definition of a molecule is two or more atoms joined together with chemical bonds. These can be the same type of atom as in O2, which is oxygen in the atmosphere, or it can be different types of atoms like methane, which is CH4 carbon bonded to hydrogen atoms. If they are different types of atoms, we call them a compound. So just to reiterate, a molecule is two or more atoms joined together using chemical bonds. So we go from an atom, which is the basic unit of all matter, atoms joined together to form molecules. Now, molecules can form what we call organelles. These are also called the little organs of the cell. So in this picture, we have an animal cell. And in the animal cell are all of these little organelles. Now you can see I have the table here, organelles and their functions. You need to know what those functions are eventually, but we will cover that in the third module. For now, I just want to give you examples of what organelles are. So here is a definition. Organelles are compartments enclosed by a membrane that carry out specific functions in the cell. Okay, so organelles are compartments enclosed by a membrane that carry out specific functions in the cell. So if you look in the upper right corner of this table, a chloroplast is an organelle that you find in plant cells primarily that carries out photosynthesis. Now remember that I told you organisms that are green in color, most of those carry out photosynthesis. Well, it's the chloroplasts that give them, or that reflect green light, and that is the reason that you see green when you look at plants. Now, another example of an organelle is in the lower left-hand corner of the table, the mitochondrion, or mitochondria for plural. This is the organelle that breaks down food molecules to make energy for the cell. Now, we talked about autotrophs and heterotrophs in the prior recorded lecture. Remember, autotrophs make their own food. Heterotrophs, like animals, have to consume food from outside sources and use that food to make energy for the cell. A lot of times this food comes in the form of sugar. So the mitochondria take in sugar. They can also take in other substances as well and make energy for the cell. Now, many organelles throughout the cell function together to make a cell that is capable of conducting all of the characteristics of life. So the cell is the next step in biological organization. So we went from the atom, which is the basic unit of matter, to molecules, which are two or more atoms joined by chemical bonds. If you go to a larger scale from molecules, you get organelles, which are specialized compartments inside of a cell. You go out to a broader level from organelles, and you get a cell. Now, the cell is the smallest unit of life. In this picture, I have blue-green algae, which we also call cyanobacteria. Now, these are some of Earth's oldest life forms. Prior to cyanobacteria existing on Earth, the atmosphere did not have very much oxygen in it. Now, you'll see here in the picture that cyanobacteria are green. They can perform photosynthesis. That means they take in carbon dioxide, they use it to make their own food, sugar, and they release oxygen. So when cyanobacteria became more abundant on the planet, the atmosphere began to accumulate oxygen because the cyanobacteria were releasing it. So that allowed more complex organisms to develop. Once oxygen was in the atmosphere, organisms could make more cellular energy. So they could increase in complexity. In this next picture, I show you E. coli, which is a type of bacteria that is abundant in our digestive tracts. Now, the interesting thing about E. coli, it is necessary for our digestive tracts to function normally, but there is a type of E. coli that can cause foodborne illness, hemorrhagic E. coli. And that E. coli is actually a bacterial cell that is infected with a virus. So the interesting thing about bacteria is they can become infected with viruses, which then makes them virulent or makes people ill. So we've talked about the fact that atoms are the smallest unit of matter. Atoms can bond together to form molecules. Molecules can work together to make organelles, specialized compartments in the cell. Then you have the cell, which is the smallest unit of life, right? You can have unicellular organisms, which is a single cell like bacteria or archaea, like I mentioned before, or you can have multicellular organisms, many cells. Now, in multicellular organisms, we can begin to expand on these levels of biological organization. So, cells can make up tissues. So take a brief moment to remind yourself of what a tissue is. So a tissue is composed or made of more than one type of cell that work together to perform a specific function. Let me move this over so you can see it. One second here. There you go. A tissue is composed of more than one type of cell that work together to perform a specific function. So in the image I have here, on the top it is showing you an epithelial cell. And the epithelial cell forms epithelial tissue. Now, epithelial tissue lines your body, okay, it's part of your skin, and it lines your organs. The function of epithelial tissue is to protect your body from invasion of microorganisms, also to help maintain homeostasis, and to cushion your organs. So the definition of an organ, you go from tissue to organ, is very similar to a tissue. So an organ is composed of more than one tissue that function together to perform a specific function. I'm going to make this smaller here. Okay, so there is your definition of an organ. Now, multiple organs work together as part of an organ system. So you can see on the top part of this illustration, there's epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue works with other types of tissue so that the stomach can function in the breakdown of food. The stomach is the organ. Now, when you look at the entire digestive system, which is an organ system, you have the esophagus, the liver, the stomach, the small and large intestine. So many organs functioning together as part of an organ system. So take a moment and try to think of some other types of organ systems in the human body. So we talked about the digestive system, which aids in the breakdown of food. There's also the endocrine system, which is basically the system that distributes your hormones, that creates and distributes hormones and chemical messengers. There's the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system. So there's a variety of organ systems that work together for the function of an organism. So there are other levels of biological organization above the organism, like a population, a community, an ecosystem, but we are primarily concerned with an atom all the way up to the organism. So your organ systems will all function together to make a functioning organism. So for review, an atom is the smallest unit of biological organization. Atoms join together through chemical bonds to form a molecule. Molecules can function together to make organelles, which are specialized compartments in the cell. Then you have a cell, which is the smallest unit of life. It is capable of performing all the functions of life, and it displays the 6 characteristics of life that we discussed previously. Cells work together to make tissues. Tissues have a specific function, like epithelial tissue. Tissues work together to form organs with a specific function. The stomach is an organ that helps with the breakdown of food. And organs work together in an organ system. The esophagus, the liver, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine form the digestive system. And then the organ systems work together to form the organism. So you start at a very small level and keep expanding out until you get to the organism. So you need to know the order of the levels of biological organization as well as a basic definition.